properties could not cross over. So in my head, if something felt like it belonged with another movie, I just naturally kind of thought that those two things connected, coming up with reasons and explanations to things that bug me. You know, I mean, that's what we do as fans, right? Is we're trying to make things work. And that's one of those things that we just kind of have to deal with. It's in my brain, it's almost like I'm making the hyper real retrofuturism version of the Avengers, where I connect all these movies and you can just watch them all and go, this all happens at the same time. I love Alien. It's my third favorite science fiction franchise. The retrofuturistic movies, cassette punk, retrofuturism, CRT futurism. Have you ever read the original script of Alien, how it originally ended?
What do you think is the best movie out of the franchise?
Yeah, there's no reason to ever talk about Aliens versus Predator.
The fact that you are actually tying all these things together is giving me a complete movie list that I need to actually watch. So today, let's talk about the good stuff.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay, Shaun, welcome back. This is version number, what, like 5 of us or something like that? And
I have no idea at this point. Yeah, it's probably like 5 or something like that. Okay. At least.
Okay. Well, the difference between today and the other days that we've talked, at least in my tiny little mind, is that today we're going to talk about science, but nonfiction science, as opposed to all the other times we've talked about, I think, pretty much actual science.
Yes.
Okay, so today let's talk about the good stuff.
Yes. So should we tell people the preamble as to how we got to this particular conversation?
We should absolutely tell people how we got to this conversation.
So last time I spoke with Michael, which, by the way, for the record, okay, I love that everybody has gone viral with that TikTok about us talking about our bowel movements and stuff and how you should be
peeing, sitting up, standing down.
The peeing, sitting up and standing down. But that was just us hanging out talking, and Michael just decided to record the conversation. Like, it was literally just a catch up. Like, we were just blabbering. And because Michael likes to keep things for posterity, you know, he was like, there's some good moments in this. Yeah. So that was not the goal of the last time I was on. Last time was just let's hang out and catch up. And one of the things I had mentioned during the catch up was that I had been, for the last almost 2 years, been writing a fan book that I call Burning Gods, which is coming out this April on Alien Day. And Michael, you basically, you're like, what's Alien Day? And I said, oh, well, it's April 26th, which is a reference to the original Alien movie where they found the xenomorph because the planet was LV-426. So kind of like how, you know, Star Wars has May the 4th be with you kind of thing. Yes. That's what happened with Alien. And so in the last decade or so, 20th Century Studios has really embraced this idea, and they tend to drop big things on April 26th. And being a person who is not only vain enough to say I've done something that I think is worthy of being dropped on Alien Day, I mean, it does feel a little vain to do that, but it also...
No, I don't think so. I think you're hitting it on the day it's supposed to come out.
Right. It also gave me a deadline. I'm a horrible procrastinator sometimes, and sometimes I need to know that I have a hard deadline. And if I have to have this thing done and formatted and out the door, it has to be done and formatted and out the door.
Yeah.
So that's the goal, is to have this thing finished, formatted, out the door, have a little tiny website that people can come to and they can download it and they can enjoy it at their leisure. It's completely free. It's not going to be anything for sale. It is literally just a fan book. And it's much more about lore than anything else, but it is technically made for the Alien role-playing game.
Okay, so we got to back up a little bit because
please,
I know that you've written a book and other people don't know. All I know is that we've come from science to localized, non-local reality to peeing, standing up and sitting down to now we're talking about aliens.
And AI. AI is also a big part of Aliens too. And we've talked about AI. So
we've talked about AI some. We're going to do a whole thing on AI because it changes so fast. By the time we talk about it today, it'll be done by the time this airs in 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, really, right? Like, seriously.
It's so okay. You got the book, and
yes.
And first of all, just I cannot believe it's been decades since Alien came out, because that movie, I'm going to put that movie and Blade Runner kind of in the whole ahead of their time, kicking butt, cinematically, story-wise, genre-wise. Those two franchises stick out to me as being super special. But we're going to focus on Alien today.
Yeah, well, it's funny because, originally we were going to talk, we were talking about the book and whatnot, but it's funny because I tie Blade Runner into my book too.
Oh, okay. Well,
yes.
Then we can talk about Blade Runner, because that's actually one of my favorite movies ever.
Right. So one of the things that I've always been fascinated about, and this really goes to what spawned this idea, because this idea came from three different core ideas in my head, which is Burning Gods, which, by the way, when you read it, you'll understand why it's called Burning Gods. But the idea behind it is, as a kid who didn't know the studio system, just thought that if a movie came out, it could talk to everybody. But I didn't realize that properties could not cross over. So in my head, if something felt like it belonged with another movie, I just naturally kind of thought that those two things connected. Yeah. And so there's like a list of movies that in my head have always kind of joined up to each other.
Oh, that's a good point. Like, okay, so wait, in your head, Alien franchise and Blade Runner overlap?
Overlap, absolutely. And I mean, even Ridley Scott, since he's directed both of those, has said that there is a lot of things that he found fascinating in Alien that then he explored in Blade Runner, which is, what does it mean to be human? What happens if you're a synthetic being and you have a purpose, but it might be limited, and kind of going through all of those permutations. There's a lot of the DNA between those two, and it asks some fundamental questions that I think ties those two worlds together. But one is owned by Alcon Entertainment, and the other is owned by 20th Century Studios. So they're really not connected, other than Ridley Scott and the ideas behind them. But it's like this inside joke. Like, even in the official documentation for both of those worlds, they nod at each other all the time, but they never outright say that they're in the same world. There's actually this really great book called The Weyland-Yutani Report, and if you'd like to, I can actually go grab it. It's right over there. But I can actually grab it, and it's written in the third person, as if somebody was assembling all the documentation that Weyland-Yutani has assembled on the xenomorph. And they talk about the founder of Weyland, and how Weyland used to have a mentor who believed in naked synthetics, but he tried to make them too messy, and it eventually backfired on him in the early 21st century. And they're clearly talking about Tyrell from Blade Runner getting his, head kind of crushed in by Roy Batty. So there is this, ongoing. They nod that it's a nod to Tyrell, but they never outright say it. So that's a fun thing that they do back and forth between Alien and Blade Runner a lot, and I get a kick out of that.
I like that. So
yeah.
Talk about the book that you've written. It's got chapters, it's got themes, it does all kinds of stuff that you say it's for the game. I didn't know that there actually was a game.
Yes, so there is a company in Europe called the Free League Publishing, and they are absolutely fantastic. They've won quite a few tabletop role-playing games awards. They're known as ENIEs, so that's ENIE.
Audis.
Exactly right. But they have made some really fantastic games based on original IP and also licensed IP. And the Alien role-playing game is really about recreating that experience of you don't know what's going on and something is hunting you. And so they only really release like a book a year, if that, usually. It normally comes down to one book, and then they might do what they call a module, which is usually like a self-contained story that you can play.
Okay.
And that's about it. They're not big on releasing a ton of material because they don't want to overwhelm the audience, and they want to keep that mystique. So when I started to write this, it was because reason number two was one of my best friends. She's almost like a surrogate sister to me. Christina is a massive Alien fan, and we introduced her to the movies. Like, she had seen them before a little bit, like parts, but she had never really like sat down and watched them from the beginning. And so we sat down and we showed her the movies, and she became like an instant fan. And then a few years later, Prometheus came out, and it was interesting. She was like, there's something really interesting about what they did here, because it was clearly in the Alien universe, but it wasn't Alien.
Right.
And she was like, I really want to know more about this. And then Covenant came out, and Covenant was kind of like, you know, the person who's doing a pretty good job at the game and then just completely yutzes it right at the finish line, you know, just basically self-sabotages.
Okay. I want to say something here for the audience that might be listening, that we will go into spoilers if you haven't seen it in the last 30 years or 40, whatever it is. It's like you didn't read, like, you know, Shakespeare, and you don't want to be spoiled by Romeo and Juliet. So we're going to talk about the movies as if everyone has seen them, and that's that. So spoiler.
Yeah, there has to be a little bit of spoiler warning, definitely. But so when I saw that Free League had released this game, I was like, first off, I love Alien. It's my third favorite science fiction franchise. It's basically a tie between Star Wars and Star Trek. They're always fighting for each other, but if I had to pick, it'd be Star Wars, Star Trek. But that's like picking slices of pizza, you know, like they're both really good.
I go backwards on the Star Trek, Star Wars.
But for me, it's okay. They're both wonderful franchises, and I don't care. Like, I love them both. And then there's Alien, but Alien has so little outside of just the movies. You know, there is a lot of stuff out there, but it's not nearly as well known. And so when this kind of misfire happened, and they said, oh, well, the xenomorph actually comes from this creation, that really upset my friend. And she was like, I don't like this. I'm done with Alien. And I felt bad, because I was like, there's some interesting questions to ask here, because there's clearly differences. And so my brain was like, okay, let me see if I can find a way to resolve those issues and keep it what I like to consider canonical. And for those of you who don't know what canon is, canonical is basically if it's happened on TV or in a movie, or if the studio says, okay, this is something that we will always adhere to, it is considered canon, meaning it happened, you have to obey it.
Yeah. Unlike Marvel, which decided that they've got like multiple universes and they can just change things when they feel like it now.
Well, I mean, even then you could still do that as long as you explain that's what you're doing, right? I mean, honestly, a multiverse is a great way of saying, hey, we want to tell this story that would never work in a normal setting, but it's a really cool what if, or you know, one parallel universe over, you know, Peter Parker goes completely insane or something, right? Like, right. There are some cool ideas there. And I wanted to try to figure out a way to make everything make sense. So I sat down and I started doing that. And that led to the third reason why I wrote this, which was I wanted to pay homage to all of what I like to call the retrofuturistic movies of my childhood. The things that all connect to each other. And there are a lot of names for them. I've heard people call it cassette punk. I've heard it called retrofuturism. I've heard it called CRT futurism. There are so many different ways of looking at it, but it's basically that part of sci-fi that happened in the 70s, in the 80s, and maybe a little bit of the 90s, where we were trying to hypothesize what the future of space travel and science fiction would look like, as if we could predict what it would really be. So they really tried to make things look used and worn and something that we knew what the purpose was. And a lot of people notice that there are like cassette tapes in Alien, like people actually have, or like if you ever watched Alien where Dallas has to go talk to like the AI on the computer to go through like this whole step of putting a passcode, then opening up a widget to pull out the key card to then go into the room. Things like that, instead of like, you know, in say like a Star Trek future where you just kind of wave your hand and the computer does what it wants to do. And
it does. I even wondered about that with Star Trek, because they still have those little things that look like cassettes that you put into the machine, especially in the original series, you know, you put in and it's all good. And then they've got tricorders that look like old school 8-track players or cassette players, you know.
It's great. But I love that kind of stuff. You know, I love when things look like they went on their own timeline. And that really spurred a question in me, which is what happened to make this world like this? And so answers 1 and 2 of I love all these movies and I want to know why they feel like they connect to each other. And I want to fix the problems of my friend not liking where we're at, and then explain why does the world look like this? Because there are some things that these worlds, even though they're not related, all kind of share. Earth is getting used up. They have like this analog, futuristic feel. They have androids a lot of the times, but they look human. Things like that, you know?
Oh, I got a question for you then. If we're going to go and connect things, what's the biggest misfire, maybe, and you're going to maybe fix this for me, was Alien versus Predator.
Ugh. Did you know that's not considered canon? It's considered its own universe, those two movies?
Okay, good. Because they don't need to be... Yeah, those are weird. I mean, I think
I'm not
the very first one worked, kind of. But from there, it was all downhill, hill.
I agree. Definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
I cannot agree more with you. But did I find a way to work AVP into the canon? Sort of. Like that's one of those where I had to really cherry pick a little bit. Like, okay, I'm going to reference it, but it's not going to be a big deal. Because honestly, predators being on Earth is fine. Like we know the predators come to the planet Earth. That's fine. That's part of their lore. But we know that they go to places that are hot and where there's a lot of battles. So them showing up in Antarctica makes no sense whatsoever at all. Yes. Like, it just makes no sense. The fact that there's a temple there, I'm like, wait a minute. So the last time Antarctica was warm, we were like cave people. We would not have had a temple there. You know, there might have been one that they built, which it looks like it is, but I'm very sus on the way they make it look like they're like an Aztec, Mayan, you know, my ancestors from South America and Latin America kind of culture, but they're in Antarctica. Like, it just doesn't fly with me. And then the other side is the whole point of the Alien series is Ripley is desperate to make sure that they never reach Earth because it might be a crap hole, but it's our crap hole. And we don't want this alien to show up and just kill everything. You know, like, you got to protect humans. So never let that get to Earth. So to then say, oh, not only is it at Earth, there's a queen in Antarctica just chilling out, waiting for the predators to roll up. And there are eggs already on Earth. It negates all of the immediacy of this is a danger and it can never get to our solar system.
Yeah, that was definitely a money grab. I mean,
well, it was based on a comic that had a really cool idea, which was it was based past the Ripley era. So it was sometime, maybe only a few years or a decade or two. But it was on a planet called Ryushi. And Ryushi was more of a desert world. And come to find out, this particular planet is a place that the Predators had picked out to do what they call the big game. And the big game, it's almost kind of like the Olympics. Like, every so many years, all the clans of Predators get together. They put all their issues aside, and then they basically pick a world and they seed it. And they come back, like, you know, a year later and let the xenomorphs just kind of run over it. And then they just go to town on whatever's there, and they get their honor by fighting the xenomorph, which is like the hardest thing in the universe to kill. So
yeah. By the way, are the xenomorphs do they have intelligence or not? I mean, like,
that's a loaded question. They have a level of intelligence. We've never seen them have a level of intelligence that comes to the sophistication of outright sentience like a human.
Okay.
But there is a hive mind. And I believe that the more aliens are together, the more xenomorphs that are together, the smarter they are as a whole. So they're not quite like the Borg, but I do believe there's a bit of a collective there, that the more brain power they have to put in a problem, the more dangerous they are, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I mean,
especially if they have a queen.
They have a queen, right?
Especially if they have a queen.
There's the whole fight with Ripley and the queen.
Yep.
And where it's like in her face.
Yeah.
And instead of just ripping her apart like a beast, it kind of stops and waits. And you go like, what is it thinking about? Why didn't it just like take its little head and eat
right.
it up?
Well, I mean, we see that in very, very not aware, but very capable predators in nature. There are predators that will stand still or evaluate another predator that could be coming at them. And, you know, whether we're talking about bobcats or anything, these animals will stalk, think, ponder before they launch, because they're weighing, can I successfully attack this thing without dying? They're weighing their chances, or they're waiting for their opportunity in a lot of cases.
Okay.
So there is an argument to be made that the Queen, while definitely smarter than the average bear, like in Hadley's Hope, was looking for her opportunity to strike at Ripley, and she tried. And Ripley then took the flamethrower to all the eggs because she had one of her drones try to get them, and Ripley just and made them back up. So there is a sign of intelligence, and they know how to figure things out. Mm-hmm. So I would say that there is a level, but we just don't know what to. Have you ever read the original script of Alien, how it originally ended?
No.
What if I told you that up until almost the time they filmed the movie, the original ending was Ripley got away in the Narcissus, the shuttle, and had basically thought that she was alone and was like, okay, made it through that calamity. And she hears the alien behind her, and it bops her in the back of the head, just, mouth through brain, dead.
Yeah.
And it throws her to the side for later, and then begins to press a few buttons, and in her voice speaks a distress signal saying that she needs to be rescued.
Oh, that would be a cool next movie.
And it just and it just waits.
And it should take the form of Ripley.
Well, it never. The implied is that it can't take the form, but that it can mimic, or that it at least has enough intelligence where it knows how to use technology, and that it's been downplaying its intelligence. But they took that out. It's never had the mimic ability since then because it never formally made it into any documentation other than an early draft of the script. But there was a point where the alien could talk and it could mimic our voices.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's terrifying. Like, can you imagine if you heard somebody say, hey, I need some help over here, and then, oh, it's an alien? Like, no, they're dangerous enough as it is. You don't need to give them any more like one-ups, right? Like,
yeah, they basically have all the superpowers they need.
They have all the superpowers. Like, they are so, and I mean, they've even gone on record to say that the alien should never feel commonplace. It should never feel like something that is just, you can handle it. It should always have a trick up its sleeve, which is why I liked what Prometheus introduced, which is that idea of the accelerant, and that there might be some connection between the alien and the accelerant. And we may not know exactly what it is, but what we do know is that accelerant is so chaotic that you never know what you're going to get when a creature is exposed to it. And it's why I like the fact that depending on what kind of alien you get, who did it get into, what did it do? They have something known as the DNA reflex, and the DNA reflex. It's a very wild idea, but the idea is that the xenomorph itself, we've never seen what an original xenomorph looks like, because whenever a facehugger implants itself on you, it's always picking up traits of the host because it's taking part of your DNA in order to learn about you. And the idea that I've always implied is that not only is it picking up parts of your genetic traits, there's this long-standing theory that our experiences, what we call instinct, our memories, are somewhat encoded into our DNA. So I tend to think that the alien has a genetic reflex to be able to not only pick up our characteristics, such as we stand up on two legs, we have two arms, we have a head, but it also has the ability to understand what our fears are. It has the basic knowledge of what fire is. It like things that we have learned over thousands of years that we just kind of get instinctively.
Right.
It gets all of that included. Plus, because they are such a sophisticated, weird little bugger of a monster, I always like to think that a bit of the person's intelligence gets transferred over. So the more and more generations of alien that are implanted by humans and then born, the smarter and smarter overall the hive becomes, because they keep getting a little bit more information.
I can go with that. I mean, that's basically how the Borg came about. They get smarter and smarter because they add to the collective, right?
Right, but instead of it being, instead of it just being a flat out, okay, I know everything you know, it's like they're just picking up bits and pieces. It's not a complete one-to-one. Hell, the entire movie of Alien Resurrection is that exact idea, which is that the alien, not only does it get your memories, it also gets a perfect copy of you inside of itself, which is why when they took her blood in Alien 3 and they had it on ice, the xenomorph DNA was in there as well. And all they had to do was separate the two. And that's why Ripley was able to start to remember the memories from her previous life, because it was encoded into the alien.
But by the way, I got to ask you a question about Ripley, because before I forget this. In the script that you said, where it like basically pips her head, and then she's dead and makes them vote the thing. She's dead in the first movie.
Yeah.
How did you feel about Ripley, first of all, coming back, and then Ripley dying?
You mean like Alien to Aliens and then Aliens to Alien 3?
Yeah. I mean, like, for me, it was almost too much. I should have left her out or something. I love Sigourney Weaver. So
I'm in a minority on this one, which is I love Alien 3. I think Alien 3 is the perfect ending to the story that they're telling. And the story that I feel we're being told through the first trilogy of films of Alien is the story of something so dark and so unstoppable that only through supreme sacrifice can we survive. Yeah. And we've all read those stories. We all know those tales. And sometimes they go the right way. I mean, I'll give a really good example. Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. Lord of the Rings, by the time you get to the end of The Return of the King, it's obvious that Frodo and Sam know they're not coming home. In order to kill the monster, they're going to have to die. And if you look at most of human literature, a vast majority of the time, that's exactly what happens. The hero has to die in order to vanquish the thing, in order to stop it from hurting the people. Yeah. And Ripley's journey from the very beginning has been that of trying to save not only the people around her, but humanity from this monster. And the irony is that, of course, the people who have the power to do so, aka the company, they want it because they feel that they know better than Ripley. And she can't trust them. But convicts on a planet that nobody wants to go to, on, as they say in the movie, the ass end of the universe, who are full of murderers and rapists and convicts and the worst part of humanity, they can see that if this thing ever got to the human part of space, that would be it for everybody. And even they are like, we have to stop it. Yeah. But yet the company feels like it can control it. And so Ripley's sacrifice in the end is absolutely the right choice. It's horrible and we love her, but it's the end of the hero's journey. She stops the monster from getting out. Okay. Now, does that mean that Newton Hicks had to die in the process? I don't like that. I hate it. I love those characters. I love Ripley. I want them to go off and have their fairy tale ending. Yes. But for the story, for the journey of the hero killing the monster, yeah, it's kind of what had to happen. And it's beautiful in the sacrifice of it. And I hate it because it's exactly the kind of emotional note that you need to sell how serious this threat is. And I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Because it's exactly the right note. And I hate it because it's the right call.
What do you think is the best movie out of the franchise?
Oh my gosh, don't give me that. Don't hurt me. Okay. Okay, when you say best, do you mean
let's break it down even further. Let's break it down. Like, there are memorable moments in the movies. Mm-hmm. Like, we know for sure when the Queen is in Ripley's face, that is a moment, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that moment. When the chest bust opens, that's a moment. Yep. One of my favorite moments, I have to say, is when Android, the one with the little knife thing, Fisher. Okay. Yeah. Bishop. Yes. Goes back and forth. That to me is a moment. It's like, holy crap. That was as scary to me as the thing busting out of anyone's chest. Yeah.
It's a bit intense, especially because they did that like on set. Like, they sped it up, but Lance Henriksen practiced that a lot.
Was that a real knife?
Apparently it was, but it was dull. And he did at one point, they said that in one of the shots, he did slice himself one time, but it wasn't a deep slice. And he just went to the medic and they took care of it. But he took care, like, that was him doing it. He was really doing it on the set. And that was the camaraderie that they had as a group, that they trusted each other to get this shot done. Wow. But yeah, it's intense. Like, it's very intense to know that was going on, like, oh God, they're actually doing the knife trick.
Well, one of the things I read just getting ready for this whole thing was that there was no CGI. Everything was practical in the movie. Right. And the thing that I read about the chest busting out thing, yes, was that no one knew that was coming.
Okay, so that's a bit of a misnomer. And it's apocryphal in the fact that they all read the script. They knew that there was going to be an entity that was going to emerge from the body. But nobody was shown the special effect prior to the day, except for John Hurt, who was inside of it. Okay. So nobody knew exactly what was going to happen because they wanted to try to keep it fresh. They knew that something was going to happen and that something was going to emerge. So there's a famous, and if you can ever get a hold of it, there's a box set. It's called the Alien Quadrology. And make sure to get the one that has all of the director cuts and assembly cuts on it, because it has like the long documentary, and the documentary is like 3 hours a piece for each movie. Wow. But in it, they talk about this moment, and they talk to Veronica Cartwright, who plays Lambert, and she knew what was going to happen. But that scream and that bounce back that she does, where she looks so terrified, is because one of the little hoses they had with blood got her in the face, and it hit her so hard she freaked out so badly that as soon as they cut from her, the next frame is basically that chair flipping back and her legs going straight up in the air.
Yeah.
And then they had to stop and make sure she was okay. What's with the balloons?
Where did that come from?
That's wild. But that is actually a thing that happened on set. She got so freaked out from the blood hitting her in the face that she fell backwards out of the chair, and her legs are up in the scene. You can Google it. It's on YouTube. It's hilarious to watch.
That is awesome.
But yeah, and the funny part was that was the second take, because the first time the chest buster tried to come through, the last little bit of latex in the t-shirt didn't break away the way it was supposed to. So they saw the blood, but then they said, okay, it's not working. Everybody leave. So they started to get an idea, but even then they didn't know, because when this thing comes punching out, I mean, yeah, it's pretty hilarious. So
that's scarier than any Jack in the Box you can buy at
right. I don't think anybody expected it to be as bloody or as nasty as it turned out to be. I mean, it's a pretty gnarly scene, and it definitely is worth its kudos in like Hollywood's like annals of just like, this is a moment that we will always remember. Yeah. It's terrifying. It's an amazing scene, and that's why when people say pick your favorite alien, I'm like, well, what are we measuring it by? Because if we're picking my favorite horror movie, I pick Alien. If we're picking my favorite action version movie, I'm picking Aliens, which is the sequel.
Yeah, and by the way, I think people still like don't realize aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's messed up.
Yeah. And then like when people say pick your favorite one, like overall, I say Alien 3, because again, it's the ending that gets me. Like the music in that movie is so like, I don't know what it is, because that movie is a train wreck. And I mean, I did an entire hour at DragonCon a couple years ago where we talked about how this is a movie that was made by committee. It had so many different writers. Mm-hmm. The director still refuses to talk about it to this day, and it's David Fincher. We're talking Fight Club. We're talking Seven. We're talking, Facebook. We're talking. He did what? True Detective, I think, season 1, or was it Mastermind on Netflix? It might have been Mastermind. But like David Fincher is like this massive creator, just an amazing, amazing artist, and he refuses to talk about Alien 3 because that's how badly he was burned.
With you about Alien 3, because I thought Alien 3 was, like you said, a train wreck, and it just did not. It like, to me, it's like the Star Trek, Frontiers number 6, whatever it is, where it's just like
Final Frontiers number 5. Yeah,
number 5. Yeah, all of a sudden Spock has a brother, and they're doing things that we don't even understand. Like, that's not canon to me.
Right. Well, I mean, but there are some things that are interesting because, like, I mean, now you're getting me on Star Trek, but in Star Trek 5, they always talk about the Great Barrier. What's beyond the Great Barrier? And they finally go through it. I mean, it's like, okay, let's find out what's beyond the Great Barrier. Let's find out. So I mean, they did some interesting things there. But it's not my favorite. It's definitely on the lower side. But when it comes to Alien 3 for me, I really look at it as, okay, this is a story I cannot change. I have to look at it from a point of view of what is our story that we're trying to tell. We have introduced the dragon. The dragon has been released in the first movie. In the second movie, the dragon has taken over everything. And no matter what they do, they can't get away from it. Mm-hmm. Except at the very end, they think they did. And then in the third movie, the dragon still persists. And there's only one chance to truly kill it. I mean, it's Beowulf. It's the story.
Oh my God, you're reading my mind, because I was going to bring up Beowulf. Yes, okay.
It's the story of Beowulf, and Ripley, Ripley has to ultimately sacrifice everything in order to kill this thing. Even though I am on team how'd that egg get there,
Right.
but I had to come up with a solution for that too. Going back to the book. So yeah, there's a lot that I had to grok out. But there's actually a really easy way of doing that, which is that egg sac that she was attached to, the queen. We saw that she had all of that kind of like goopy, bloody resin that was kind of dripping off of her when she pulled away. I imagine that the alien spore, the organism, the queen, it probably has a property of, if it knows it might die, that stuff is extremely accelerated as far as like being able to create an egg. And it would more than likely create what I always has considered the more canonical of the two, which is the super face hugger, which is a stupid name, but it's a royal face hugger. It has, they show in the assembly cut of the movie where it holds it up and it's kind of like, it's not the yellow fleshy looking, it's brown, blackish, and it has webbing between the fingers, the knuckles. And it's about 3 times the size of a normal facehugger.
Okay, because by the way, I think the facehuggers are one of the scariest things in sci-fi. I mean, just like
Hans Rudy Giger is nightmare fuel master when it comes to what's in his head. And God bless him for getting on that movie, because he gave us one of the, like, when I think of monsters that will always be scary to humans, I think of kind of like the old school Universal monsters, right? Like the undead man who's been brought back to life, the vampire, the werewolf, creature from the Black Lagoon, the alien.
Well, I'm saying, like, his artwork that he did for like all the Emerson, Lake and Palmer covers, same thing. I mean, you look at those and I'm like, I'm not sure what this means, but I love the art.
Right.
And when I saw Alien, I'm like, oh my God, this is ELP on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many wild things. And to know that he almost was part of making the Dune movie and they were going to give him all the Harkonnen stuff.
Why did they not?
Well, it was originally going to be done by this guy called Jodorowsky, who is a very famous writer and artist, who has done other films. But Jodorowsky was going to do like this massive version of Dune that was going to be like 4 hours long, but it was not going to be remotely close to what the actual novel was about. It was going to take some of the ideas and just off in its own little space, which it would have been interesting. And they almost got it made until they sat down and did the real budget for it. And it was going to be like, and this is in the 70s, like $170 million to make this movie. And nobody made $170 million back then. I mean, that's insane. Yeah. That's like that. You know what it is? That's James Cameron saying, I'm going to make you 3 Avatar movies, but I'm going to need $500 million, but you're going to make it back. And somebody's saying, okay, bet. Only person who get away with it is James, right? Like the only person who could have gotten away with that is James Cameron.
So by the way, speaking of Dune, because I saw the first one, 70, whatever it was, or 80, whatever it was. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like 1982, 83, something like that. Yeah.
And then you've got the ones that are out now with Chalamet and all that kind of stuff. I'm still not feeling that either Dune movie is capturing enough storytelling. I don't know how to say it right.
I get where you're going, but this is where I have to kind of sit down and ask myself, what do I want from an experience with Dune, which is the novel is about complex political machinations between various houses of humanity trying to control essentially gasoline, for lack of a better metaphor, but they're trying to control all the gas in the known universe. And they're all fighting to have an upper hand against the other families. And it is very much a, diplomatic, conspiratorial, deep movie that then turns into a messianic story halfway through about one of the families turning out to be this supreme being that will bring not only chaos to the universe, but eventually bring order to the universe.
I'm just wondering, why has nobody taken Dune and instead of trying to make this into a X number hour movie, just do it as a TV series?
Well, I mean, Sci-Fi did the first book as actually they did the first 2 novels as miniseries. There's a sci-fi miniseries from 2001.
Well, okay, I never saw that. Was it any good?
It's actually a pretty good adaptation, all things said. It does show its age because remember when sci-fi, like back like at the beginning of the 2000s, they would do like these miniseries events and they would hype them up as these big events, and they would put a lot of money after it.
Give me an example.
The Battlestar Galactica remake that they did.
I thought that was fabulous, by the way.
Yes. But that was like the 6th or the 7th big miniseries that they did. Like Dune was like, I think like number 2 or 3 that they ran. And they shot for it. I mean, they said, we want this to look as crazy as possible. So they got in all these different artists, and every single house had their own kind of like look to them. And so it's wild because you could see this is what the Bene Gesserits are going to look like. Okay, these are the Harkonnens. This is and everybody has like their own look, and it really, really works. But they did not shoot on location a lot. They shot a lot on sets. So there's a moment where you think you're looking at a really cool desert, but you realize you've seen those 4 dunes before in the background. Right. And you realize all of a sudden, oh no, and it breaks the illusion. Because once you notice the dunes in the background, you can't go back to ignoring them. And you're like, fart. Because then you just realize, oh, they're just on a set. Versus even being green screened, it would have worked. So it shows its clunkiness a little bit there. But the acting is actually pretty good. They did the Blue Within Blue Eyes really interestingly, which is that since they wanted to make it as naturalistic as possible, you know that stuff that the doctors used to give you where they would put it in your eye and they'd put a black light over it and your eye would...
yes, I'm allergic to it, yeah.
Right. So what they did is they put every person who's supposed to have spice in their blood, and they'd get those blue within blue eyes. They'd give them those dots, which would last a couple of hours, those droplets, and they would just have a black light just off of set that would reflect into their face, so their eyes would glow blue on camera.
Okay.
And it worked. But because of that, they had to be careful about what colors they used on the outfits. So some colors would be really bright, so that way it could absorb the light, and other colors would be really dark, so that way it wouldn't have that weird reflection that comes with the black light. So you get a really interesting color palette. I mean, there's actually some really cool stuff that happens in it. And like I said, as an adaptation, if you want something that feels pretty accurate to the book, that miniseries is about as close as you're going to get.
I may go back and watch it then. I'll look it up and see if it's on one of the services somewhere.
It's probably on Peacock or something. Now, Children of Dune, even Children of Dune is actually pretty good, but they didn't have as much budget. You could tell where they cut. Some actors weren't brought back. It starts to show it starts to show budget a lot more in the sequel, but it's a serviceable sequel.
It's a shame that like art has to suffer because of profit. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah. And I mean, here's the thing. Art doesn't have to suffer because of profit. What you're really doing is you're trying to measure in general the ability for you to reach a lot of people. So when you're looking at your art, if you just want to make it, you can make it. But if you want to reach a large...
I mean, look at the expense, though, of actually creating like Dune 2, the one that's coming out.
Dune Part 2. Dune 1, Part 2, something like that, yeah.
I mean, the millions of dollars you have to raise and the things you have to think about cutting or leaving in because of budget, because you don't know if anyone's going to go see it or not. I'm just saying.
Sure, but I mean, you could go the Roger Corman route, and Roger Corman did his own version of Star Wars. You know, what was it, Battle Beyond the Stars, for a fraction of the budget that George Lucas did, and he was able to create something that worked pretty well. Now, was it Star Wars level? No. He gave up special effects. He gave up maybe actors. He gave up distribution because he was going for a smaller footprint. Mm-hmm. But he was able to do what he wanted to do under the budget that he wanted. I mean, hell, I know, and I mean, this is not apples to apples. This is just an example. I know plenty of people who have literally made just their own little movies, like with VHS cameras, that it's just them making a film, and then they just say, okay, I made it, and they put it out there, and if it gets seen, great, and if it doesn't, they made their art. So art by its very nature doesn't have to be something that's exploitable. Unfortunately, if we want to make a living at it, we have to basically allow the people who will give us the money in the first place, to try to make money off of it.
Yes.
And that's your balance.
Maybe that's where the art gets sacrificed for profit, you know?
Yeah.
Like, how long would we have had to wait? I guess we'd still be waiting if we were waiting for the last Game of Thrones to actually be as good as the first 6, seasons
Yeah,
of Game of Thrones.
I'm still curious as to why they just didn't split that into 2 seasons and just give them the time to allow Dany to go crazy the way she needs to go crazy.
Yeah.
Because
I don't either. I'm just saying, is that
Yeah.
because of the money? Same with Lost, right? I mean, I loved Lost up until
I will not brook any Lost bashing. Nope, we will not go
really
there.
even the last season.
I love the last season. I think the last season was a great stroke of genius.
Talk to me about the smoke monster. What the heck was that thing?
Okay, so the basic concept in the whole thing is that the island is the wellspring of souls.
Okay.
So if you know your Catholic faith or anything like that, you know that it's also called the Keep of Souls. But the idea is that, or at least it used to be a Catholic idea. I don't know if it goes back to the Jewish faith and Hebrews, but I do know that at some point, this idea that there is a keep where God has all the souls that will have ever been born. Mm-hmm. And that when that keep is empty, that's when the end times will begin. And that through the end times, the keep will either be refilled or it will not. And that's what brings apart the apocalypse and then the 1,000 years of peace and blah, blah, blah. So I've always interpreted, and again, a lot of it kind of points to what is being shown in the show, that the island is the wellspring of souls, the keep of souls. Mm-hmm. And the smoke monster is the apocalypse. It's trying to get out. And that plug is what keeps it like stuck, where it has to see the creation of life, but it can never truly be a part of life. And the island brings people to it to help either keep the balance, which doesn't mean it's fighting for good or evil, but keep the balance between the light and the dark, or to help foil the darkness if it ever tries to get too powerful. And
I can almost go with that, except for that none of that is explained. And if you have to be a biblical scientist to understand what the smoke monster is, then you are not telling a good story. Same with the touch, when people get touched on their wrist and all of a sudden, it's been so long since I've seen Lost, but in the previews or post views, whatever, they show like, oh, you get touched on the wrist and now something happens to you. You could never pick that up just from watching the show. There are no clues about being on the island, off the island, and what happens to you if you do certain things.
Yeah, I don't know about the touch per se. I don't know that particular sub story.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and see where they show it, but they do close-ups of, oh, he got touched on the wrist, and now because of that, there's something bad's going to happen to him. And I'm like, how would you ever pick up on that?
Well, I mean, people do tend to want to read into everything, and that's part of the fun. I mean, hell, my entire book that I'm writing, right, that I'm about to release, is all me just coming up with reasons and explanations to things that bug me. I mean, that's what we do as fans, right? Is we're trying to make things work, and that's one of those things that we just kind of have to deal with. So with Lost, I'm like, I tend to like to know that there are answers out there that we'll never get. But I also like the fact that in some ways, Jacob made it very clear what was going on. He was like, no, this is all the evil in the world, and we're the cork. And the island needs to stay there in order to keep the cork in place. And it brings people that it needs to. And I like the fact that that final season was every person who had been on the island and had died, everybody this is part of my own personal mythology. We're getting into a little bit of spiritualism, but the quick and easy of it is that I believe that everybody, when we pass, has to come to terms with the decisions we made in our lives, good or bad. Okay. And our afterlife isn't so much about punishment as it is accepting who we are and the decisions that we made. And until we're willing to accept all of our decisions, good, bad, and in the middle, we're not allowed to then move on and to whatever that next thing is. And so that's something I've always kind of gravitated towards in my own personal, mythology, belief system, whatever you want to call it. So to see that reflected on a TV show, which literally is these people are coming to terms with themselves. And the reason why they're all trying to get back to each other is because they can finally accept what happened to them and then move on together, is a really beautiful thing. And you even see that, what's his name? The guy who was really crappy, who helped out Hurley. as his assistant when Hurley became the keeper of the island, the evil guy who always changed his name. He was a liar.
Whatever his name is. That
Yeah.
is on person of interest now, or then.
Yeah. That particular character. But how even Hurley was ready to move on, but that character was not ready yet. He still felt that he was not at peace to move on to the next phase. So he had to wait. And so to see them then accept that they were all dead and that this was all them coming to terms with everything that had happened right up until they either died on the island or the island let them go is a beautiful metaphor. And I think people hate beautiful metaphors sometimes because they feel like there's a monster, there's a thing, there's this overwhelming arc of ooh, and then it turns out to be, what? It's this? And I get that. I get that, because it can feel like it comes out of nowhere.
It pretty much came out of nowhere. So
yeah. And I get that. But I thought it was cool because you're jumping back in time, you're jumping forward in time. People thought they were jumping sideways in time, but no, technically they were jumping past time. They were jumping to the afterlife.
You and my friend Zia are the only two people I know who appreciated the last season of Lost.
Well, I'm glad I'm in good company.
I'm gonna actually put you two in touch.
Okay, you should.
I will do that.
But yeah, so but that goes back to the Alien 3 of it. That goes back to just sometimes it's fun to entertain the idea of what if we stop trying to drive the story and let the story just be told. And if we like it, we accept it. And if we don't like it, then we don't have to accept it. We can just let it go. Like I'm a big fan of like something until you don't like it anymore, then just walk away from it. It's okay to only like a certain portion of something. You don't have to like all of it. It's not a like a dinner where your parents like eat your plate. If you only want the mashed potatoes, eat the mashed potatoes and leave the rest.
I'm feeling, and this is just, I have a gut feeling that the 3-body problem is going to have a Lost ending. It hasn't even started yet, and I'm like afraid of the ending.
Well, I mean, you've read the ending, you know the ending, and we can't talk about the ending. But
no, we're not going to talk about it. I'm just saying.
Except for we'll do the one spoiler that I give everybody. It ends with a goldfish.
Yes, okay.
And I remember when I told you that, you got so mad. You're like, why did you tell me it ends with a goldfish? I'm like, it has no context, dude. I promise you, when you get to it, you will understand the magnitude of the goldfish. But until you get there, it makes no sense.
Well,
and I was right.
I know you were. But you know what it is with me with spoilers or non-spoilers or even like seeing special effects? It's been my little tiny brain, because I know that there's going to be something coming up. I can't stop looking for it until it's happened, and then I can go back to now everything else is a surprise. But if I know it's coming, I'm looking for it and waiting for it to see what the significance is.
Yeah, and I even warned you. I was like, the goldfish doesn't show up until the very end, and there's no preamble. Don't even try to look for it. You're not going to see it. I mean, I told you flat out. Just
no, you did. It's a movie. It's a thing. I can't stop it. It just makes its way into my life.
Yeah, and I was just like, be prepared. But that's kind of what I kind of wanted to do with the book, which was I wanted to make something that was kind of a magic trick, which is this is something that you can insert into a game, or you can just read it and enjoy it as a part of the story and say, oh, all these things connect, because it's in my brain. It's almost like I'm making the hyper real retrofuturism version of the Avengers, where I connect all these movies and you can just watch them all and go, this all happens at the same time.
How can people get the book, by the way?
Well, I'm going to be releasing it. If I remember correctly, I believe I bought the domain, but if not, it's going to be bought shortly. But it'll just be burninggods.com.
But if you on the DL until like you go get it today.
Right. But it should be burninggods.com, and it'll just be available to download. I'll also, of course, have links to it wherever I put it on like my social media. So if you follow me at NumaZ, you can follow me there. TikTok, even though I might be rebranding my TikTok, but right now you can go find me over there. I think it's like Shaun Awesome or something.
But by the way, people who don't know and they've been staring at your Shaun at
NumaZ. Yeah, that's NumaZ. Yeah,
at PNEUMAZ. NumaZ.
Yeah, which I think we talked about my handle too at one point.
Yeah, and it's for all the people that are either listening or don't know what that is. It's Numaz.
Yeah, PNEUMAZ, and you can find that on Instagram. You can find that on Twitter. You can also find my wife and I at Pop Cycled at most places. But I'll be dropping links to that everywhere. And like I said, I'm looking for it to be burninggods.com. If that changes, I'll message you. I'll send you a clip, and you can drop it in. But yeah, it's mostly going to be essentially me laying down. I mean, I'll tell you exactly what it is. It is me laying down a timeline that states, this is what I thought as a kid. This is what I want to do with this book. And this is where we're going to go. Take the parts that you like and leave the rest. And then we go through the timeline. And the timeline, the way this is written is I'm trying to explain what is happening. So that way, if you've watched the movies and you don't want to know all the back history, you can just read this as a player or just as a casual fan and go, oh, that's really interesting. Then there's going to be things like, well, what is culture like? What are some of the weird things that have happened? And I kind of elaborate and flesh out all these things. I then go into different versions of the xenomorph and other kind of alien creatures that are out there that you can find that are not necessarily aliens. I talk about artificial intelligences. And then we get to what I consider the big part of the book, which is the game mother section, which is, okay, we're going to take you back to the beginning of time and explain to you exactly what everything is. And it links it all together. And it says, this is why this is included. This is why this is included. This is where the alien really came from. And even when I say where the alien really comes from, it's still a mystery because there are questions within the answer, because you should never know everything. But I've always believed that you should have kind of like a roadmap that you can allude to in a game. So if you want to hint towards these things, you can, but you never have to actually show it. But you need to know what the answers are before you ask the question, which is what I think happened in subsequent movies of Alien. As they went further and further, people started asking questions that there were no good answers for. And then the answers that they gave weren't satisfactory. So I'm trying to create good answers that then people can go, oh, okay. And they can either use it or not use it.
Have you talked to any of the producers, directors, showrunners, anything for the movies? Have they picked your brain? Have you talked to them?
I have not. I know a lot of writers that write for Disney specifically, who write for 20th Century Entertainment, who write for Alcon, who have written for Blade Runner, Predator, and Alien. I know a lot of writers who have written for all three of those properties, and they're not allowed to talk to me about this project. And it's not because the project is bad. It's because if they talk to me about it and then something that I mentioned to them pops up incidentally in one of their books, I could potentially come after that company. Right. So they're not allowed to really know about it. They know conceptually what it is, but they're not really given the details. And they may not even after I release it. But at this point, nobody's really allowed to talk about it other than just casual fans. Like, if people just want to talk to me, I'm more than happy to tell you. But when it comes to people who actually work in the industry, people who are actually actively making content officially, they're not allowed to talk to me just because they don't want to be caught up in the rigmarole. So,
I am going to go back and watch the movies again in the context of your book. I want to
yeah. But remember, there's more than just Alien. So we didn't really say, and we'll leave this to the very end. So if you don't want to know what movies that I'm tying in, this is your hint to stop right now, because I'm about to tell you a lot of what has actually been pulled into the series. And it's not a small thing. So I'm just letting you know, if you do not want to know, you need to stop right now.
Now, why would they not want to know?
Because some people, they want to, read something and they don't want to be spoiled. They don't want to be.
No. I'm saying if we pulled in, I think E.T. was pulled into the Star Wars universe in the little chamber where you saw them. Well,
how many people were so spoil anything? Right, but how many people were so spoiled, so surprised when they saw E.T. Right? So I always like to tell people, if you don't want to know anything and go into this completely blind and then read on it.
So I should turn off my speakers right now and not listen to what you're going to say?
I mean, if you want to, I'm just going to tell you the movies that I'm including.
Okay, go.
Okay. So the movies that I'm including is the very first one that is going to be brought in that is outside of the Alien universe is actually a 1950s movie called The Day the Earth Caught Fire.
Okay.
And it's a British film that explains why things go the way they do and why the Earth starts to look the way it does. After that, we talk about Prey, which, of course, is the amazing Hulu movie that deals with the Native Americans fighting a predator in the Great Plains of America. The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing is included in this, which is a massive one, is including the sequel. The sequel and the original from 1981 or 82 are both, in my storyline, canonical, and there's a reason why they're there. Okay. Part of Terminator is canonical.
I was wondering about Terminator. Okay, all of them are just the first, second, third, what?
Technically, only like half of the first movie is canonical. Okay. And I can give this part out. The Terminator actually gets Sarah Connor in this timeline.
Mm-hmm. Really? Okay.
Thus, and the reason, and because it actually, basically the idea is that since they've introduced the idea of all these branching timelines and how multiple timelines are trying to go back to that one moment, if they're successful, technically they stop themselves from existing. So in this particular one, Skynet, just by the factor of that it killed Sarah Connor in this timeline means that they never make Skynet that way. So it just stops. So Terminator does happen to the point where Sarah Connor dies and Kyle Reese is killed. And then that's it. Like no more Terminator after that. Okay. It just kind of blocks itself off. And I explain it more after that. RoboCop.
The first one, not these remakes?
RoboCop and RoboCop 2. I allude a little bit to RoboCop 3, but RoboCop 3 is really, really, really like
you can say it out loud.
It's really bad. Yeah. But there's some stuff in RoboCop 2 that I enjoy. There's some really interesting philosophical questions that go on there. Plus, there's the whole bit of you can see that the world is really breaking down. You can see that Nuke is starting to take over. OCP starts to have an issue. There's some really cool things that I allude to later on because of that. So RoboCop and RoboCop 2 is part of that. Obviously, the Predator movies, every single one is included. And I explained some of the really horrible choices that they have made in some of the later Predator movies and kind of grok that out. One of the real fun ones that I got to include was Species.
I remember Species, yeah.
Yeah, it's it's the only other real movie that had an H.R. Giger alien design.
I actually, in my mind, kind of put those two together back in the day.
Yep.
So yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. So Species is in there. I don't do Species 2, 3, or 4. They all just they muddy it up too much. Yeah. So I have to ignore those. I do make allusions to Aliens versus Predator, but I keep that to a minimum.
Thank you.
Like it's basically like something happened, but basically I say, well, if it did happen, the queen got crushed by the depths of the ocean, so it would have been dead anyway. So we don't care. Like there's no reason to ever talk about Aliens versus Predator. Like just don't. By the way, I'm listing these basically in chronological order as they're happening in the book. After that is Soldier, which is the awesome Kurt Russell movie from 1999. It's one of the writers of Blade Runner wrote this movie. And they have said that it is a spiritual cousin to Blade Runner. So there's actually like a spinner from like Blade Runner in Soldier, things like that. Okay. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I've worked Soldier into it. Of course, we have Blade Runner itself, which is a huge cornerstone piece. The Sean Connery movie called Outland, which came out in 1981. Basically, it's a Western in space. It's kind of like the shootout at the OK Corral, but in space.
Okay.
But yeah, that story is actually real easy. Sean Connery's playing a marshal. He's been sent out to a colony on one of the moons of Jupiter, and he gets there and he finds out there's a lot of organized crime being run by the people who are running the colony. And he's like, well, I'm going to break this up. And he kind of goes John Wayne on them. So I'm serious. It's like a Western. Like they have guns and stuff. And it's like, well, how do you have a gunfight in space without everybody dying?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know what I'm saying? So it's pretty wild. But there's a lot of really cool stuff in there from that. And then, of course, we have, after Outland, we have Event Horizon.
Never watched it.
Terrifying movie if you've never watched it and you get really freaked out by body horror.
Yeah, I mean, does it have
Terrifying.
more body horror than, say, The Boys on Netflix?
Yes. Think more
Wow.
Hellraiser. Think more Hellraiser kind of
Okay.
stuff in space.
Okay.
So that was an interesting one to work in. And I worked that in for some very specific reasons. After that, it's actually a pretty modern movie that feels like it would belong with them, which is actually a movie from 2018 with Pedro Pascal, of all people, called Prospect.
The fact that you are actually tying all these things together is
Mhm.
giving me a complete movie list that I need to actually watch.
Yep.
Because all the movies that you have given me, not even in response to your book, but just things we've talked about, have
Mhm.
all been good. So the fact that we're building a universe, like I love this. It's like Brandon Sanderson building his universe.
Oh, thank you. Well,
And
hopefully when you read it, you feel the same way and you go like, oh, that was amazing.
okay.
And then who knows, maybe then all the people who I know who can't talk to me about my writing, once it's out there and they're like, okay, I finally got a chance to read it since it's out there now. Maybe they'll be able to look at it, and who knows, maybe one day I'll actually be, brought in. They say, what would you want to do?
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking. It's like, well, you've done all this research. It's like,
Yeah.
It's like the parents who like train their kids forever and ever and ever to be the best musician ever. Michael Jackson, the bass player I've been watching lately, just other people. It's like, he's a star. Bring him in.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm more than happy to take any pats on the back that are offered. So I will gladly take that pat on the back, sir. Thank you. One of the last ones before we get to the normal Alien timeline would be Screamers, which is actually another movie that stars RoboCop Weller.
Okay.
If you've ever seen that one, the movie itself is not great. But it has a couple of really cool ideas. Have you ever seen Screamers?
I've not. I followed Weller through Buckaroo Banzai.
Right. Well, I mean, RoboCop happened after Buckaroo Banzai.
Yeah, and RoboCop. Yes.
Right. But it happened like in the mid 90s. It takes place in the latter part of the 20th century, and essentially two mega corporations are fighting over this one planet for a rare resource, and they just drop nukes on it. And the people who are left there are surviving, just trying to continue to gather these resources. And it's more or less kind of like a Cold War that's happening on this place. And one of the sides developed this technology called a sword. And the sword is essentially these little automatons that they're called screamers. And they dig underground. And if you're not wearing the right kind of armband, it recognizes you as an enemy and it just burrows up to you and then it just cuts through you. And the reason why they're called screamers is because all the buzzsaw blades that it has on it, as it gets close, they rev up. So you're hearing this thing rev up and it's about to kill you. And so what they find out is that the swords have started making new versions of themselves, and they start to look like humans. And so there are screamers now that look like people. So they're like, now the humans are like, we have to get off this planet. Like
that
now.
I've got to watch.
Again, it's a really cool idea. The execution is middling at best. So please keep in mind that I'm taking the idea of screamers and putting it in and kind of going like, this is a cool idea, but I'm not really like saying this is a great movie. You definitely want to watch it. It's more of a watch it for the of it all, and go, that was interesting. They could have done more with it. But it's still at least worth it.
Ties into Aliens somehow.
This is me just expanding the world. And then there is, of course, the chronology of Alien, which would be Prometheus, Alien Covenant, Alien, Aliens, and Alien 3.
Okay.
We do not consider Alien Resurrection canon. However, I do explain it in the book. Okay. And when you read it, it will make sense. But that is a spoiler. That is one step too far that I promise you do not want me to give.
No, don't.
It is something that
otherwise I won't be able to read your book and I'll go like, I can't stand this anymore.
It is maybe, in my opinion, the coolest thing I've done is finding a way to make Alien Resurrection not count, but still make it canonical.
Okay.
And it's one of those where I'm like, okay, this is great. And I hope it lands. Like, if anything happens, I hope this is where somebody one day takes the Alien franchise, because that's where I think some of the most interesting things are taking place, is what happens after Alien 3 and why Alien Resurrection doesn't need to be what it is. And again, when you read it and you read everything together, it'll all make sense. And then there are other extra literal aliens that I put in. Like I introduced new alien species that are not xenomorphs, just actual sentient species that are out there. There's not a lot. I like to try to keep the space kind of empty so that people can play. But I wanted to make a couple of things so that way I can point to it and say, well, this is happening here.
We're going to talk about this again after I've read it, and after it's been released, and then after I've read it and watched at least some of the movies, and we get back together. Definitely have to rewatch all the Alien movies, the Predators. I'll probably watch a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, start with The Day the Earth Caught Fire. That's the first one. It came out in 1954, I believe. Same year as Godzilla, so it's 70 years old.
Wow.
And it's a British film. It is very British.
Wow.
I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say, oh my God, it's like this. It's basically atomic scare fiction. So if you've ever seen those movies in the 50s where they're all afraid of the nuclear bomb, because why wouldn't you be at that point?
Right.
That's basically what they're talking about.
We're doing it. We will be back on, Shaun. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
I'm fascinated, and the spoilers were good because I'm not afraid this time.
Well, yeah, and also, like I said, all these movies have been out forever, except for Prospect, which is a relatively new movie. And you know what? We were talking about how people can't get their art made. It's a really well-made, fits in the universe of Alien as far as like just the aesthetic. But it was made for a very small budget. It's got Pedro Pascal, who of course has, just huge cred to his name now. Yep. The acting is phenomenal, and it's a really cool idea.
And I'm just interested to read the book and see how you pulled all this together of your own dimension. That to me is art. That is fantastic that you pulled this together.
Thank you. It originally started as a 23-page document, and it is now like 300 pages.
Okay. By the way, are you going to do a audio book version of it, you think, or no?
Maybe. I haven't thought that far ahead of it. Right now it's about just finishing the formatting, because at this point I'm finishing the text, and then I have to do the formatting over the next like month and a half.
Get somebody. I don't read a lot because I can't, because of my eyes.
Right.
But I will force my way through yours for sure.
Well, I will definitely try to make one. There will be two, just so you know, there is 2 versions that are being released. Just because I do know I'm technically the ADA compliance officer for my college, so I know that sometimes people have a hard time reading certain things, and the format of the Alien books are a little bit hard to read because it's all black with white text on it, and that can be very hard on the eyes. So there will be an eye-friendly, print-friendly version if people want to print it. So it will be black and white. A friend of mine, he releases role-playing games, and one of his favorite games that he's released, he's done one called the colorblind version, because he works in these really hyper colors, and he'll put black text on them, and people who are colorblind can't see the text because they have the same tonality as that vibrant color in the background, so it's all just one big gray page to them. So he's gone back and he makes the colorblind version, which is it's black and it's white, and it's very legible.
Okay.
So that's something I've also considered, just because I want to make sure that people can read this without difficulty. Awesome. So there will be the fully formatted and then the colorblind version, which will still have all the graphics where possible, but it will be much more focused on legibility versus stylistics.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. This has been amazing.
You're welcome.
And we're definitely going to do this again for another show in a few months. And
okay,
we'll get back to it. So,
all right, I'll get you a copy as soon as it's ready, and you can read up on it. Okay,
I would love to actually be able to read it. So, say goodbye to everybody, and
bye everybody.
See you all in the future. Thanks for being here.
All right, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me, and I will see everybody in the future.
In the future, I'm going back there.
There we go.